Wherever the Republican Party heads next, it faces an uphill climb as it tries to take over New York City in this year's mayoral race. We welcome now one of the Republicans trying to do just that. She is Sara Tirschwell. She's the chief financial officer of Foundation House, which provides mental health services to New Yorkers needing help. But before that, she spent 29 years in finance in New York, including at Davidson Kempner Capital Management and most recently at TCW. And we welcome her now to Bloomberg. So, Ms. Tirschwell, thank you so much for being here. Listening to Jeff Immelt there, it struck me, I think you may agree with him about quite a few things, given what you've said on your website and what I've heard you say.
I actually agree with him on a lot of things. One is that we need fresh new voices in the Republican Party. Second is we do need some regulatory reform, absolutely. And we actually need to do some soul searching as a party and figure out exactly, what our message is to the American people and how we are going to make the United States a better place to live for our children and our grandchildren.
You have the large issues of where the Republican Party faces. You also have some pretty big issues right here in New York City, because New York City is not in great shape. First and foremost, because of the pandemic, I think it's fair to say, but it has a lot of problems that go well beyond that. What would make the New York voter turn to you to try to fix that?
Well, I would say that New York City is in pretty dire financial straits. I think everybody recognizes that. My history is all in distressed finance, investing in troubled situations, which basically means, trying to figure out what is good about a situation, what's bad about a situation, what's worth keeping, what's not worth keeping, what can be changed and what can't be changed, and also identifying the fundamental reasons why a situation is distressed. And in New York City, there are a few very fundamental reasons why New York City is distressed. And they actually coincide with the very reasons why the voters are so angry, which is basically, I have this concept that I call regulatory inequality, which is that the regulatory regime in New York City has become so oppressive that it favors the haves versus the have-nots, and it raises the price of entry to anybody who wants to live here, relocate here, start a business here, operate a business here, and also how to educate their children here.
So you certainly have issues that you've talked about, particularly using small business as an engine for growth and the regulatory overhang on a lot of small business. At the same time, you have to have an environment where you want to live and you want to bring your children up. And there's a situation in the city actually having to do with safety. I mean, it's hurting our tourism business, for example, quite apart from the pandemic. We have a lot of crime problems in the country, in the city. What would you do about those?
Okay, so first of all, I don't think that crime is the main thing keeping tourists from coming to New York City right now. I think COVID is the main thing keeping tourists from coming to New York City. But yes, we do absolutely have a crime problem, and that has to be fixed as kind of a baseline issue before fixing anything else. But crime is solvable. Crime is a matter of having a different mayor with different priorities and allocating resources differently to the problem. Crime, in my opinion, is the number one most easily solvable problem in New York City.
What about education? What needs to be done with respect to the public schools, particularly given the pandemic right now? Would you reopen the public schools, and how could you get that past the unions?
Absolutely. Well, I don't know how I could get that past the unions, but absolutely, the public schools should be open. I mean, you understand the issue of the charter schools that want to reopen but can't because they're leasing property from the city, which I think is just bureaucratic nonsense. We have to get schools reopened. I don't know how much you've read about my life story, but unfortunately, I have dealt with suicide up close, and it's a very personal issue to me. And the suicide rate has risen significantly across the country and also in New York City. We now have a mental health pandemic, frankly, amongst adolescents and teens in this country and in this city. And we need to, it is our responsibility to reopen schools. And I'm sorry, I know that people are scared, but part of the reason that people are so scared is because we have leadership who have, I think, instigated fear in the people of New York City. And secondly, they've done nothing to quell their fears about this, about, offering safety within the classroom or within the school.
So you do have a very sad story, personal story that I have read about, and you've really overcome an awful lot. Finally, I do want to ask you, this is Bloomberg, as you know, and we cover Wall Street a lot. A lot of investment companies, the ones you've worked for, in fact, including TCW. You're locked in litigation right now with CCW, where you're alleging, as I understand it, sexual harassment, really pretty awful sexual harassment against you. They're claiming you violated compliance rules. Give us a sense of where you are on that, and maybe as important, is it relevant to your run for mayor? Could you bring some of that experience into being mayor?
Okay, so I'm going to start backwards. So it's relevant because I think that there are lots of women who have encountered, harassment and gender discrimination on the job, not just on Wall Street, but on Main Street. And many of them, have not had the resources to be able to step out and stand up for themselves. And so in a sense, I am stepping out and standing up for them as well as myself. And I believe that also it makes people understand that I am not necessarily of the establishment just because I worked, in an establishment type industry for most of my career, that I was willing to stand up and fight against the establishment when I saw that they were doing something wrong.